Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Lights down, that's the signal. Okay, no more talking. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all here. My name's Robert Levitt. I'm the acting dean of the faculty. It's great to have you here for tonight's event. Before we proceed, I wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For centuries, for thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississauga of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are very grateful to be able to work on this land. And before I talk about tonight's event, I just want to remind everybody that the last event of the fall public programming series is next week on November 20th, and we'll be hearing from Alfredo Carabello, a partner at Elias Morrison, and he'll be talking about strategies for tall buildings. Can you turn it down a little bit? And whether they can make good neighbors and participate well in the urban fabric. Obviously, a important topic for us here in Toronto. So, for tonight's event, tonight's lecture introduces the work of ReHousing, a design-forward nonprofit organization addressing housing challenges through applied research, consultation, and education. ReHousing brings together practitioners from LGA Architectural Partners and academic collaborators from the University of Waterloo and our faculty here at U of T to explore real-world housing solutions through interdisciplinary experimentation. So over the past 3 years, the team has developed a catalog-based approach to housing design, spanning scales from home to multiplex conversions to small-scale apartment buildings. And their methodology aligns with national initiatives led by the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation to expand small and medium-scale infill housing. So the idea being that through a catalog of housing can become a tool to make small-scale infill housing a more feasible and scalable strategy for city building. By addressing regulatory and economic barriers, catalog housing supports the broader ambition of incrementalism. So a city shaped over time by many small buildings constructed of diverse actors resulting from heterogeneous and human-scaled urban environments. So obviously a complement to the kind of large district building that we also see shaping Toronto today. So the members of ReHousing, whom I'd like to welcome to the evening's event, are Janna Levitt, partner with LGA Architectural Partners, which she founded in 1993. Janna, as a partner in charge, has led the Laurentian University's new MacEwan School of Architecture, the Mabel Arts Park Pavilion, the CMHC National Housing Catalogue, and the Ulster Multiplex Condo, to name a few. And she is currently in the Housing Urban Studio here at the Daniels, and has been an adjunct professor at our competitor, University of Waterloo, and Dalhousie School of Architecture. So Janna lectures widely on architecture and is an active jury member and panelist on architectural and urban design issues across the country. And from 2011 to 2015, she served on the Canada Council Venice Biennale Advisory Committee and is currently on the Waterfront Toronto Design Review panel. Now, Samantha, or Sam Eby, is an architect and researcher based in Toronto. She's the co-founder and the executive director of ReHousing. She's also the director of This Office, that's the name, and architecture and spatial research practice. And her work investigates how design, policy, financing, and ownership structures intersect to shape the built environment with particular attention to housing and affordability. And in 2020, she was awarded the Canada Council for the Arts Prix de Rome for emerging practitioners. And in addition, her architecture and research practice, Samantha is an assistant professor at the University of Waterloo School of Architecture. Finally, Michael Piper, my colleague and associate professor here at the Daniels faculty. He's co-founder and director of research for ReHousing. Also, he was the co-author of, I think, an important related exhibition a few years ago with Richard Sommer called Housing Multitudes, which we had in the downstairs gallery, very beautiful show. Michael's applied design research addresses real-world challenges, particularly how typology can inform zoning policy. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming them to the stage.
We had like an awkward discussion about how we were going to introduce ourselves, whether we would sit down and like one of us talk. So here we are saying hello and introducing ourselves. And now more awkward is I'm gonna actually introduce what we're doing, and we have these two chairs set up. We're tag teaming because I think one of the things that we care a lot about is our collaboration, which I'll just mention briefly as a way of introducing the work. So before starting, we'd like to note that this was a research initiative that started as a collaboration, as Robert mentioned, between LGA Architectural Partners and the University of Toronto. And in 2022, this was made possible by funding from the NEPTIS Foundation, and we'd like to thank the NEPTIS Foundation and Zoe Coombs for this opportunity. So last year, we formed as a nonprofit, for which Sam is the executive director, and it's been a ton of work, so we just want to recognize the effort in kind of transitioning to a nonprofit and everything else that goes into making us work. We've also got here an amazing group of collaborators from over the years, so if you're out there, hello and thank you. And I'd like to send a special thanks to Toby and Arena, whose handiwork you're going to see tonight. Is there anything else that's worth saying before I launch in? Okay, so what we're sharing tonight, over the past several years, the federal government, through CMHC, has invested in housing innovation and design. LGA won an RFP to lead the National Housing Design Catalogue, which you're seeing on the left. And ReHousing, we were awarded funding for round 5 of the Housing Supply Challenge to develop a suite of interactive online tools. Today, we'll share this work along with some ideas and research that have led up to it. As a kind of primer, zoning rules in Northern America are changing to allow new forms of multi-unit housing on in single-family neighborhoods. As architects and urban designers, we were able to take advantage of these rules. Our ability to assess property, steer our own small projects through design, approvals, and construction kind of provided a starting point for a lot of the conversations that we had when we were first kind of getting going with this project. And specifically the idea that as designers who were able to kind of renovate our own basements or think about buying a lot where they could do a small apartment or creating their own multiplex condominium, we felt like with this knowledge was something that we'd be able to share with others, non-professionals seeking to do similar kinds of work. So this could range from, again, homeowners adding a unit to improve affordability, small builders and nonprofits growing their capacity for larger, more complex projects. And the kind of overarching goal for this is a belief that a more diverse building industry will yield a broader mix of housing better suited to the varied needs of local constituents. Aesthetically, we're interested in how this expanded agency, a broader class of citizen developer, might lead to a more heterogeneous and fine-grained built environment, something Robert mentioned when introducing us. So this is a vision for a city region shaped by many small acts of building, though it will not be easily realized in North America, as here we are used to building big. To understand why this is a challenge, it helps to look at where this culture of bigness comes from and how it impacts our capacity to build small. Following World War II, there was a demand for new housing. Governments formed regional planning authorities to manage a new scale of city building growth. Metro was one such regional authority. The map you're seeing here is from 1943, was an early kind of effort to plan the city at large. And these yellow blobs indicated are new block subdivisions to house upwards of 50,000 people. These subdivisions, or neighborhood units as they're called, are rubber stamped across the urban region at a kind of unprecedented scale over the 20th century until we almost filled the region up. This happens in spite of the fact that from like 1980 to 2006, as you're seeing here, there was a drastic lull in regional planning. And so in 2006, the kind of effort to plan the region was kind of rekindled, aligning with global trend. Sorry, I misread here. Regional planning was rekindled in an effort to kind of reinvigorate and rethink the region at this time. So one goal of this authority was to build out urban cores. This is the growth plan for the region that was developed in 2006. The plan pushed new development into growth centers across the region, its varied municipalities, including downtown cores and suburban centers. And to my knowledge, the scale and enforceability of this planning regime is unmatched in North America. I remember reaching out to my best friend, who's the boss of zoning in New York City, and I showed him what's happening in Toronto in the 2010s, and he was blown away at the scale of regional planning that's happening here. And it got me thinking about like how that kind of affects how we build and the kind of attitude to making cities and how distinct it was from any place I'd lived prior. And to streamline this mode of construction at this big scale, approvals pathways, financial systems, professional services are all geared for large-scale builders, of which Toronto has a comparatively few number as compared to other cities. And it is within this context of bigness that ideas for building small emerged. In 2018, the city introduced a set of policies meant to open up single-family neighborhoods to multi-unit housing. Broadly speaking, the idea was that instead of continuing to build outward, we should fill in our existing single-family areas, which make up over 40% of the region's land supply. Advocates call this type of building the missing middle, small to mid-sized buildings that can fit on a single lot. The idea has been widely influential, but uptake has been limited, and it's worth taking a moment to consider why. So viewed from the perspective of form or scale, the missing middle describes a type of housing that is in between low-rise single-family homes and high-rise towers. But a problem with this perspective is that it does not really reflect how we actually build. And so one of the reasons I shared some of this history is to provide some context for this. So we don't build single-family homes one at a time anymore. Rather, we build these vast subdivisions on one hand and towers on the other. And so when viewed from this perspective, this middle scale is not so much in the middle of our housing types, but rather exists in a kind of feasibility gap. Bigger projects offer more value to people who finance, design, and build them. These efficiency, referred to as economies of scale, encourage builders to build big, making it comparatively difficult in this context to build middle-scale infill housing and to realize the kind of ambitions of incremental infill that it promises. So it is in this context where both institutions and industry push housing to larger scales that we believe it is important to rethink housing design if indeed we are interested in expanding the smaller to medium scale of our built form. And so I'll share a few ideas about what I think needs to be considered in order to do this. One is that medium-sized housing is financed, approved, and built currently like larger projects. And so from our perspective, we're currently researching the architectural characteristics of a multi-tiered housing system that provides kind of discrete pathways, both formal, technical, logistical, and regulatory for small to medium-sized projects. Another idea is to kind of think in many instead of thinking in one. So how to think about buildings not as kind of a singular object, but as a system or typological system of buildings that identifies, and our approach to this method is to identify the kind of dimensional limits for basic buildings, so the stair configurations, how the units are laid out, and then to align these with parcel widths. And in doing so, focusing how design as a system of many repeatable iterations can then kind of propagate at large. And so this is very much kind of, scalable and supply and building more driven. It falls in line with some of the attitudes of how we're building these days. A brief caveat to say that we're not speaking explicitly about affordability in this context. There's not an assumption by building more will solve that challenge, but we do think that building more is important. So another aspect of this idea of repeatability is to use methods of morphology to kind of map out parcel sizes and the urban structure across the region to understand where different types of buildings can fit. And Sam's going to speak a good bit more about this in a second, and we'll revisit this slide to speak more about it. So with these conditions established, we also work to make buildings that we think look nice. And so here are a few examples of the scale that Robert mentioned, and again, that Sam's going to speak to in more detail. And in some, we're interested in such frameworks for housing production that can be deployed across a range of sites, making small, well-considered forms of housing easier to reproduce, adapt, and multiply in different contexts. And so I'll hand it over to Sam.
Our approach to design research and catalog housing has evolved a lot over the last almost 4 years that we've been working together in response to the changing guidelines in our cities, but also a lot of trial and error to try and navigate some of these complex ideas. From our original catalog, which outlined 4 ways to transform 13 common houses in Toronto from single family to 4-unit multiplexes, our research has since expanded to include new build 4plexes, 6plexes, and most recently, small apartment buildings. Our work on new build 4plexes began with the goal of understanding how the dimensions of a parcel impact the type and size of multiplex that you could build on a site. A key aspect of this work was understanding the impact of different stair configurations on the design and layout of multiplex units. Whether a project has stacked townhouse-like units, each with their own stair, 2 shared stairs, a scissor stair, or hopefully soon a single stair, circulation plays a really crucial role in organizing the internal space of a multiplex. It affects how units are accessed and how livable space is distributed, and different stair types and orientations work better on different lot sizes. We tested these configurations using a matrix consisting of 1,440 potential lot sizes categorized by width and depth in half-meter increments. This comprehensive grid enabled us to account for the variety of lot sizes that we found across Toronto's residential neighborhoods. Each potential lot size on the matrix was mapped with relevant zoning regulations, including side yard setbacks, rear yard setbacks, maximum building depth, height, and other requirements in order to determine a maximum building envelope for each. From here, we mapped diagrammatic floor plates of each stair configuration to determine performance boundaries based on unit area. And so this mapping established a foundational understanding of which parcels could support different types of fourplexes. The different shades of blue highlight the thresholds where a floor plate is large enough to accommodate different unit sizes, with the bottom showing studio units and the lightest at the top showing 4 bedrooms. This process was repeated for different configurations of each stair type to estimate the lot dimensions most compatible with each type. Luckily, our research assistants were more than willing to do this, including on taking into account lot coverage percentages, and so they drew diagrams of thousands of multiplexes. From this stage, we transitioned from basic footprints to more detailed, though still high-level diagrams, testing how available space could be used to create functional dwelling units while accommodating realistic room sizes and considerations of circulation. And again, we identified thresholds, points where small changes in the size of the lot or stair configuration could lead to significant impacts on the overall configuration of the plan and the size of units it could support. So again, here, each shade of blue represents a zone of lot dimensions with a functionally similar layout. For example, a transition might occur when you see a change where the site becomes wide enough that 2 bedrooms can be accommodated at the front instead of just 1. And then it was really important for us to demonstrate that these plan diagrams could translate into real buildings, and so we selected representative lots from across the city and developed more detailed architectural drawings for each stair configuration. This work was under development as we were considering the viability of pre-approval and in discussions with the city about how complex that is and how to respond to the variety of lot conditions and opportunities presented by the urban fabric. Following the passing of the multiplex bylaw, which allowed 4plexes all across the city, City Council requested that the planners consider 6-unit multiplexes within the same envelope. And so we were commissioned by the City of Toronto to undertake a study to look at the viability of 6plexes within Ward 23, Scarborough North. This time, looking to establish thresholds of viability, we took a different approach. Rather than starting with the lot dimensions and understanding what was possible on each lot, which was impossible given the time frame for this time we started with the building. Using the envelope design outlined by the multiplex zoning code and sets of minimum standards that we developed in collaboration with the city, we developed a catalog of diagrammatic configurations for 6plexes at 2-meter wide intervals. We considered 3 types of schemes: no parking, parking with an integrated garage, and parking at the rear of the lot. And these factors around parking were added to the dimensions of the minimum 6plex to determine minimum lot sizes in each case. Then, using GIS, we examined the parcel fabric in the ward, identifying varying increments to look at which lots might be able to accommodate these different scales of building. As the lot gets wider, less depth is required to meet minimum unit sizes, and configurations with parking in the rear required deeper lots than ones with integrated garages. Finally, as a last part, we selected a series of case studies from these types and identified sample lots across the ward to test these assumptions in more detail, integrating considerations like lot coverage, soft landscape, and circulation. And then the lessons from these more detailed drawings were fed back into our mapping exercise to refine the thresholds of viability. Ultimately, from this study, we determined that approximately 60% of the lots in Ward 23 were large enough to accommodate a 6plex, and 40% could accommodate a 6plex with 2 parking spots. Most recently, in response to new legislation allowing increased density along major streets, we expanded our research to include small apartment buildings. This work was developed in collaboration with Kilogram Studio. The new bylaw amendment allows the assembly of up to 3 lots and permits multi-unit residential buildings up to 6 stories and 60 units along designated corridors. This introduces mid-rise forms into areas previously limited to low-rise development. These major streets are characterized typically by wider right-of-ways, higher traffic volumes, and greater access to transit infrastructure, which makes them natural sites for intensification in the city. But they also extend across the city fabric through areas where the urban fabric and lot structure vary significantly depending on where and when they were developed. This presented a new opportunity to further explore the relationship between parcel and building dimensions. There's no single template for this type of development, but we were interested in whether a component-based system could serve as a conceptual design tool, one that allowed for the rapid testing of small apartment building iterations at an early stage. Rather than beginning with the lot like we did with the 4plexes or the footprint, as we did with the 6plexes, this time we began at the unit scale. The dimensions of unit components take into account ideal room dimensions, structural systems, and unit depths to consider access to natural light and spatial arrangements. And then from there, we developed a system of unit clusters that could be combined in different configurations to generate a range of mix of units and overall building forms. These clusters could then be assembled into larger building types that could adapt to varying site conditions. We tested different shapes and circulation systems and documented how each responded to different parcel configurations in urban contexts. This resulted in building forms roughly corresponding to 7 letters, I, L, C, H, U, M, and O. Each letter form represents a different approach to massing and circulation and is suited to different lots in size, condition, and context. Each of these shapes offers different opportunities and constraints. Lots along major streets generally fall into 3 categories. Front lots, where the entire frontage on the street is facing the major street. Flanking lots, which occur at a corner between a major street and a minor corridor. And reverse lots, where the major street was historically the rear yard of a single-family house. And so we tested each of these shapes and to see how they would engage differently with the street, the neighborhood, and the public realm. To test these ideas further, we developed 3 representative case studies that looked at different shapes, different levels of lot assembly, and different neighborhoods, and then applied them to real sites and contexts. Our first case study is the I-shaped building, a small apartment situated on a single pre-war laneway lot with a semi-detached condition. Located in a downtown neighborhood, the site benefits from proximity to the city core and public transit and has secondary access via the laneway. And so because of this, we minimized parking on site to just 2 units. The front of the building contains 3 2-story units, with the rear, which includes amenities on the ground floor, 3 flats, and 1 additional 2-story unit. Although the building reaches 6 stories, it incorporates a sloped roof and inset balconies that break down the massing. The ground floor unit fronts directly onto the street with its own porch and yard to mimic the rhythm of the neighboring houses, and a side path that provides access to upper units and space services. The compact footprint required a careful combination of single and 2-story apartments to achieve a desired unit mix, incorporate a barrier-free unit, and also provide outdoor space for every resident. The second case study is on an assembly of 2 lots in a flanking site in a post-war neighborhood, and uses an L-shaped building, where one side of the L faces the major street and the other side faces a lower residential street. Given the larger parcel size in this area, this configuration was able to accommodate 26 units while leaving generous open space at the rear for parking, landscape, and daylight access. The L-shaped building is made up of 2 distinct clusters. The cluster facing the major street contains ground floor amenities and a more urban facade with stacked units. The cluster facing the residential street is composed of 2-story townhouse-style units on the ground and 5th floors, each with direct access to backyards or rooftop terraces. An open-air circulation system links the 2 clusters, providing natural light and ventilation, reducing conditioned space, and offering informal gathering areas for residents. This combination of unit types and outdoor spaces seeks to blend some of the best aspects of apartment living, shared utilities, and a sense of community with the benefits of a single-family house, including outdoor access and privacy. The third case study is the largest lot and explores a 3-lot U-shaped building on a front-facing parcel in a Metroburb neighborhood. The Metroburb we typically define as after the post-war period, so post-1967 to the early 90s. The building fronts directly onto a major street, and the wider frontage of 3 assembled lots accommodated 30 units around a central courtyard. The building's major street side integrates amenity space to activate the frontage with 2-story townhouse-style units positioned along one edge to transition towards the adjacent single-family homes. The opposite wing contains communal spaces and building services, and parking is placed at the rear to maintain a continuous and animated street. We see the scale of all of these buildings as an opportunity to introduce unit types that are largely absent in the current market. Particularly, we had an interest in 2-story apartments that might support families, multi-generational living, or live-work units. The design of all 3 of these buildings provides a mix of larger units with small, compact ones. Again, we were experimenting with external circulation to connect the upper floors with units on levels 3 and 4 accessed via open-air corridors that double as communal terraces. And the upper level is accessed through a shared rooftop terrace. The two clusters form a break in the massing that aims to reduce the perceived scale of the building from the street, allowing it to read as two smaller volumes. Together, the range of outdoor spaces, from private balconies, semi-private terraces, backyards, and shared courtyards, works to try and create a rich network of outdoor living spaces. Across these examples, we hope that you can see a similar set of components that can be combined to produce a family of buildings that adapt to the context while maintaining a consistent logic in their structure and organization. From the fourplex to the sixplex to the small apartment, our research has worked to try and highlight both the potential and challenges of building small. We explore how evolving policy frameworks can translate into design opportunities and how design research in turn can inform policy. While the design of a single small building on a small site may seem incremental or insignificant, when understood as part of a replicable framework, their collective impact becomes more significant. At ReHousing, we're constantly trying to navigate these two scales, the urban and the human, linking technical and quantitative analysis with the lived experience of housing. And I'm going to pass it to Janna.
Thanks, Sam. So when the three of us started ReHousing, I don't think we would have anticipated that we'd find ourselves talking about catalog housing. I should say, I didn't, probably Michael did. Let alone have the extraordinary opportunity to put theory into practice with the National Catalogue. Tonight I'm going to talk about the catalog from the perspective of our role as the national team lead with Michael Green Architects in BC. I'm going to focus on the development of the system and the framework rather than the individual house designs. That's another whole issue, and it's not as relevant, I think, as what we're talking about tonight with catalog housing. I want to show how the catalog emerged from a national design conversation, weaving together the country's key housing challenges into a framework that adapts to regional realities while staying true to the core issues. As Michael said, catalog housing is both a system and a scalable and repeatable tool. These properties make it ideal for supplying one type of housing solutions to the market. It doesn't preclude architects participating. Rather, I believe it actually expands pathways for contributing to design culture. I think it's about thinking about architecture more expansively. I see it as akin to the conversations that we all have about prefab housing and how there's a kind of distinction made between prefab and catalog housing, and I actually think that distinction is a false argument. It's only one part of a broad spectrum approach to housing design, and you can see in the images here that catalog housing has been around for a long time, but primarily for single-family homes. This is the first national catalog issued by the newly created CMHC in 1947. It was initiated to address a housing crisis created primarily by World War II vets returning home and opting to locate in urban centers. It's all single-family residential. In 1947, you went to a Government of Canada bookstore or ordered one through the mail. The cost was $10. What's fascinating is that $10 was actually part of your down payment, that as an end user, you could put that towards your catalog house. And finally, it allowed you access to federal financing and a mortgage through the CMHC. The 2025 catalog is 50 housing designs for infill, urban, primarily multi-unit residential typologies, and they were all selected to address the current housing crisis. It's only available online, and anyone can download all the documents for free. The fact that this is a national catalog is a distinctly Canadian approach. This slide summarizes the differences between the 47 and the 25 catalogs. I'm not going to read them all, but I want to point out two of the changes that I see as key influences that shape the design of the 2025 catalog. And one is the need for the design professional, and the other is, of course, climate change. And as a whole, I think that the comparison illuminates the increased complexity of our work as architects, even on something as simple as a housing design. The RFP required that the country was divided into 7 regions. So in response, we assembled a group of leading missing middle housing architects to represent each of their regions. And we have Abbott Brown in the Atlantic, Canva in Quebec, LGA in Ontario, 546 and Oxbow in the Prairies, Dub Architects in Alberta, Michael Green in BC, and the Taylor Architectural Group in the North. In retrospect, I suspect that when the RFP was issued, there was an idea about some commonalities in each region about climate, economic heft, population, and stats, but that didn't really turn out to be the case in the end, and that was actually quite interesting. In response to the RFP, we also created a new role, that of the national team, and with LGA leading 6 of the regions and Michael Green leading BC. And part of the response with the national team was the following group of consultants: Urban Strategies for Urban Design and Planning, Half Climate for Environmental, Office in Search of for the renderings, NBLC for Economic and Real Estate Marketing, which we felt was a really important part of a national catalog, and testing ideas about affordability across many markets, Vermeulens for Costing, ReHousing, for obvious reasons, and Kerr Smith for graphic design. We really felt that this team was necessary to enable us to work concurrently, both with the regional teams developing their designs, while at the same time developing the national framework and system. And finally, the team was rounded out by the extraordinary contributions of the CMHC team assigned to the project, and without whom the catalog would never have been successful or such a rewarding experience for all of the teams. And I just want to point out, I think it's really important that we acknowledge really stunning public servants, because in the end they can make or break the success of a project, and we should do it more often. The RFP also mandated the typologies, and as I said, they're all infill and aimed at municipalities, both small and mature. And it was interesting to note that every region was already in the midst of writing new multi-unit policies, creating inclusionary zoning, and establishing new city intake processes for these types. And that actually formed part of the way in which we thought about organizing the drawings. And this was an outcome of the federal HAF funding that had been introduced several years prior, and was done really to actually tee up the country for an increase in the density. So it actually was a very successful program in that respect. As we know, there's not one voice speaking for all of Canada. It's a sticky, disparate mass with diverse views, languages, economies, and environments. And almost immediately on starting the work, our hunch about the need for a national team was validated. It was to identify, synthesize, and systematize the key design drivers across the country and to construct the national framework in which each region could thrive. This slide captures those drivers and groups them thematically. I'm going to review just a few of these to illustrate the way in which the resolution of each contributed to the national toolbox that we now call the Housing Design Catalogue. Climate was like the gateway design driver, introducing us to the complexities of synthesizing diverse design information. As you can see from the map, every province or region has many climate zones within that one province or region, let alone the country. To address this, we in HAF Climate established a national rubric. Each region identified a representative climate zone for the purpose of modeling and calculating sustainability and structural design work for the typologies. Each package of drawings has a color coding that identifies the information that the end user needs to validate and to calculate variations up or down from that set point. In addition, with HAF Climate, we developed a national climate resilience guide that fleshes out all the climate-related issues across the country and how to address them. This next example from the resilience guide addresses flooding. The end user looks up their region, identifies the specific sources of flooding and how this impacts their housing design. The guide has a section for each climate and resilience issue and then suggests various mitigation approaches. Following this, the guide provides specific tips, tricks, and strategies from site design to building systems that the end user can selectively enact in their catalog house. This system of a national frame and a regional response became one of the primary design process tools. If climate was the gateway issue, then energy sources, specifically fossil fuels, was like the difficult child in the room. Currently, there's no uniformity in the country regarding the energy sources for heating and cooling. The discussions we had about fossil fuels and developing a coherent and progressive national approach revealed significant regional differences and difficulties, various political perspectives, and of course a lot of existential angst. To complicate this, none of the aggregated regions were uniform in their use of fuel sources. However, all 7 regions shared a common goal to advocate for better energy stewardship and performance. With CMHC and Half Climate, we set up a national performance target, with Tier 3 being the minimum design set point. BC has its own step-up performance code that I would say establishes them as a leader in this regard. Regionally, each set of drawings includes anywhere from 2 to 4 mechanical design solutions, along with energy models for each of them. This enables the end user to learn about and hopefully opt for a better performing house. The climate resilience guide I just spoke about is useful here too, more as a knowledge mobilization tool or plain English guide for end users on how to minimize the use of fossil fuels and carbon. The National Carbon Reduction Strategy was interesting in how it came about. There are no basements in any of the house designs. Wood is the primary structure, and we specified low or no carbon construction materials that are available nationwide. The exclusion of basements became like the national thin red line connecting climate resilience, energy, and carbon, because in our early discussions, every single region talked about experiencing record floods and the record number of flood events for a host of regionally specific issues. We all agreed that flood-proofing basements and sites, particularly in an urban infill condition, was both costly and complex. So in balancing affordability and lowering carbon, the no basements became a win-win. Half Climate designed yet another guide, the National Materials Guide, which together with the Resilience Guide allows for informed end-user decisions. Determining the lot dimensions for each region across the country was a logistical and technological odyssey. Each region needed 2 prototypical sites to accommodate a design for both a wide and a narrow version of each typology. Urban Strategies scanned all of the significant municipalities in every single region across the country to identify both the best reference cities and also average lot sizes. CMHC retained Resumates, a GIS mapping consultant, to analyze the city's urban strategies had selected and to quantify the greatest number of sites per size per municipality to develop the regionally specific site dimensions and also to smooth out many of the anomalies. The graph shown here captures just one of the many iterations which we called histograms that contextualize the GIS information to refine the selection process. And like many of the things, because this is a national catalog and a public catalog, many of these decisions had to be really able to be litigated by a public who have many thoughts about many things and have a lot of interest in expressing them. So we had to make sure we were on sound footing. ReHousing worked with each regional team, providing a crash course in how to systematically test and mine the relationship between typology and a representative site. This was a key skill most teams needed some skill to, or information to acquire, as all were architects in practice. So designing a real building without a real site with zoning and planning criteria was not a common experience. They also assisted each team with a toolbox of strategies to address the myriad of other site and building issues that needed to be considered when negotiating the relationship between zoning and codes on a fictitious site. Accessibility in the aging in place was another national design driver that was a common goal across the country. BC, as with energy, is a leader in this issue as well, with a bespoke set of standards. All the other regions either referenced their provincial code or the NBC. In addition to that, CMHC requested that we use a more recent standard with the really wonderful name of CSA B652-23 to create an enhanced accessible design option. This standard runs actually much deeper than code requirements, and all the regions really struggled with the implementation. So we developed a series of design blocks that all of the teams dropped into their plans to help reduce the challenges, but also to ensure a consistent application across the country. Almost all of the designs have at least one accessible ready and one enhanced accessibility unit, unless the typology is too narrow or the units are 2 stories. And finally, developing the renderings was an act of co-creation between the regional and national teams, CMHC, and Brandon Bergen's team from Office in Search Of. Conceptually, it started as one enormous Miro board that facilitated a national conversation about, amongst other things, how we represent a catalog architecture. Months of digital conversations and notes, all aimed at identifying the specificity of each region, started to break down into many Miro boards, ultimately becoming one board per region. 50 designs with 50 different environments, represented by one hand to communicate both the tangible and intangible national design vision. Many great exchanges took place over the course of working up the renderings. The pace of production on the catalog was extremely fast, and we were only able to get together all in one place in Ottawa, and it was 3 days of exchanging ideas and trying to get to know each other as much as we could. So the relative looseness of the rendering process became a way we started to learn more about the personalities and perspectives of each of the teams as we left digital post-it notes and memes and other bits and bobs on the Miro boards. And in retrospect, it was a shame that we didn't get to do more of this, because I think being able to invest a bit more of the personalities of the teams could have translated into more distinction regionally. But as I said, the catalog was done quite quickly. For the LGA team, we always look forward to opening up the Miro board in the morning and seeing what the people working on the project across the country were saying and how the work was progressing. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Michael to talk about the new digital tool.
I just looked at the clock. It's pretty late. Thanks, y'all, for your patience. Okay, so this is pretty quick. I'm going to share a bit about a platform that we built with CMHC funding. So I'm just showing here some of the collaborators we have for the project. Sam's been working, leading the charge, working with MIT, Community Planning Collaborative, and Idea Theorem, among others, to kind of produce the platform. And again, we have our team listed here. It's been a really surprisingly exhaustive effort over the last kind of 2 years, I'd say. So for non-professionals looking to add units to a home, it's often difficult to know where to start. There's a maze of rules, site constraints, practical considerations that determines what can be built on any given lot. And so to illustrate this challenge, I'll focus on one set of rules particularly, which is zoning. Here's Toronto's zoning map. You zoom in, you click on a lot, and it pulls up this. I mean, it doesn't pull up this, but this is what it references. It's the bylaw, and this is actually not the bylaw. It's the table of contents to the bylaw, of which Oh, I can't actually read it on my screen. Oh yeah, it's the next slide. Of which there are 3,092 pages. What is a citizen developer to do? Oh, I was waiting for that question. We'll get there later. No, I mean, it's interesting, actually. So I'll try not to segue too much. There actually isn't a kind of dedicated service for providing homeowners a kind of high-level study at this scale. And it's a kind of gap that we were seeking to fill. We do send folks to architects, so we'll get to that. But it's a really interesting question we kind of wrestled over quite a bit. The comment was hire an architect, by the way. So naturally, this can seem daunting. So to make the process easier, and I'm kind of fast-tracking a whole lot of other stuff that went into kind of developing the platform, by the way. Like underlying this is just piles of data and information that Sam, along with others, have been sort of assembling. But at the end of the day, to make the process easier, all of this data information we've synthesized into a series of kind of easy to understand design schemes that kind of combine zoning data, practical information, building code concerns, and present them in a way that's hopefully kind of easy to understand. And so this is the platform that we're going to share. And due to slight technical difficulty, I'm going to, oh, look over there. Sorry, the transition was a little awkward. In any case, here's our platform. It has on the main page a series of elements such as a design catalog that you can find on our website currently, a kind of guide about where to start. I'm not going to go through all of those. I'm going to skip to the interactive tools that we've been developing. So there are kind of two parts. One is a property analysis tool that assesses properties. That's the kind of blinking images that I shared. And the other is a quick budget tool that provides kind of cost analysis for them. So working with MIT, we generated a database that, again, embeds zoning data into the actual parcels. Right now, they're not correlated directly. And because Ontario being what it is, you can't actually access property data easily. That's another conversation. You can search a lot, and then up comes the kind of information about it. So here's the data that's embedded into what we have in our database. But again, because there's not, and I'm sorry, I have a little bit of an axe to grind. Because we can't get access to other forms of data, we ask these simple questions. How many floors do you have? Is there a basement? Do you have a garage? These become a way of kind of filtering through the design scenarios that we will eventually provide. And so once you kind of answer these questions, you're able to kind of see like what types of projects are going to work potentially on your lot. To give folks like an idea, not just like if it was yes or no, but to give them a sense about what may be possible. They're kind of graded onto kind of likely to work to more complicated. And so when you click through these projects, there's another series of questions that we ask. So for example, if your basement has a ceiling less than 6'4", then it flags it as complicated and informs you to speak to an architect and a builder about maybe the need for underpinning your basement. Other questions such as access to stairway circulation or windows kind of also help you filter these ideas. There's other scenarios you can go through, of course, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll just note that one part that's kind of currently under development is the kind of new construction piece. So if you remember the map that Sam shared and all that the blue one with the flickering lights and the different building types, we developed that in a way in order to kind of develop a matrix of these designs that would then be embedded into the system. So if you click on a parcel, it tells you which of these fit on your lot. We've since kind of revised that approach. It didn't turn out to be the smartest, but in any case, you can kind of, again, click through, see different options, both of new builds or the renovation series. So I'm going to go back to the basement and, oh no. I know a fast way around this. So projects are saved, and you're able to continue your assessment of the project. So after you answer questions, you can go to a kind of design phase where you can Change the floor area. The system warns you if you've exceeded the capacity for the floor plate of your building. Specify your building type or how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms you may want, and identify kind of a cost threshold for your project. Identify what kind of kitchen you need and other kinds of infrastructural needs for the projects or servicing needs, heating, what type of electrical system, plumbing needs. No septic systems in Toronto. And then from that, we worked with a group in California who developed a kind of costing tool, and we've adapted it to the Toronto context. So for mostly this is based on per square foot cost, but there's kind of nuances in how the cost is calculated. But you have here, the kind of development cost overall, hard and soft costs, monthly costs that are kind of similarly calculated. You can see what your return on investment will be, the increase in value to your home that's estimated. And then enter kind of change variables such as your down payment or your cash investment in the project, the interest rate for a loan that you may have, the amount of rent that you can charge, the average stay for how long your tenant will be with you or your estimated tenant will be with you, et cetera. So from this, I think the most useful part of the tool is the capacity to kind of generate a report. And so this, I was mentioning earlier, the kind of go see an architect question, or responding to the go see an architect question. The idea isn't that this is replacing the role of an architect or a planner or a builder, but rather to better inform non-professionals so they can speak to them a little bit more intelligently. So the report includes things like data about your house. Again, that's provided by the system. It shows you the cost analysis. I won't repeat all of these because you saw them on the platform just a second ago. But in addition to that, we have this series of kind of step-by-step processes, descriptions for folks to walk them through the process of hiring a designer, et cetera. Financing options are described. I think you get the picture. And lastly, kind of like, building your team, how to go through the kind of design and approvals process. And construction. There's a lot of pages. I'm going to stop scrolling now. In any case, this is the kind of end of the tool presentation. I would like to invite you all. It's currently about to be released as a kind of beta format, and we're reaching out to folks to test it for us. So if you're interested in giving it a kind of try run, we have the QR code here that you can scan, and we'll send you a link eventually to test it out. So thank you so much for your patience as we went through all of this work. I think we have to go sort of over that.
We'll do a little Q&A. Thank you so much. What an interesting and intensely detailed body of work you've all done. It's very impressive and amazing. Is it? Ah, okay. I was just saying it was an amazing body of work, very detailed and deep in scope, I thought. I did have a thought and a question about it, though. I mean, it's very interesting because I was thinking as you were all presenting that the work, I mean, at the beginning, both I mentioned and then Michael repeated this idea of incrementalism. And I was thinking about how, for instance, a very characteristic form of Toronto is the cheek by jowl difference of everything with everything. The city has taken shape in ways that seem to demonstrate little consistency of pattern. And I was thinking about how the work that you all are doing is very, on the one hand, has a very, like an extraordinarily detailed analysis of all of the dimensions and factors that go into the individual building. And then you have an analysis which examines very large-scale planning questions, like sort of a quantification of, I mean, really the urban field, or even the national territory. But there isn't that intermediate scale where you sort of say, what do you think is the destination of mutations in pattern? And I often think I mean, it doesn't have to be Toronto, it could be anywhere, but you know, you walk down the street and you have a row of single-family houses, and then there's a multi-unit apartment on it. And do you think, is the destination, is the horizon of that development ultimately going to be that everything is going to turn into the apartments? And then if so, what is the desirable pattern outcome of that build out? Are we always thinking about the build out, or is our incredibly heterogeneous city, is that already the outcome? And I just wonder if you have thoughts about that. Or maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter. I guess I was thinking to preface my question with saying, I want to ask a question about the things that you didn't do.
I mean, I think one of the things that we are both interested in, all of us are coming at these problems from a design background, and the tools that we're using to explore them are the tools of designers. And I think we're both interested in how things can be repeated, but also within that repetition, how we can make space for difference. I think a lot of the work comes from a response to a lack of diversity of options, and I think that some of the kind of educational-based pieces around educating a public to be able to better participate in a form of housing development comes from a desire to, I think, continue that difference across the fabric that we see. I don't think we're advocating for every single multiplex to look the same, but to start to bring in a kind of new cohort of participants into who is shaping the housing that we have, and hopefully actually end up with maybe more difference than we currently do.
Yeah, and I would say one of the things you learn as an architect is what you foreground and what you don't foreground. So for instance, with respect to the catalog, the fact that it's wood construction, I see as a very positive thing, not only from the carbon, but because you can actually renovate wood construction. You can't renovate concrete or other kinds of panelized construction. And to me, that's to get to what Sam was saying. What interests me is, starting out with one kind of house. One of the things I think that's really successful about Toronto is that one house at the beginning of its life is not the same house 20 years later, 40 years later. And so if you can start introducing types where that's possible, you not only are able to create a city that grows and responds to change over time, but also responds to the people living there over time. So you're not locked into a certain kind of living space. You can say, I have agency, I can change it because I want to add a room, or I want to change the physical aspect of it. And that's something that the big scale of things doesn't allow you to do.
Yeah, I think it's like understanding housing not as a product that's finished and delivered, but as a living thing that needs to grow and adapt as we change.
We won't all respond to every question, but I wanted to speak to the thing we didn't do, because it's interesting. We're teaching a class, Janna, myself, and a number of others, where we're looking at kind of small apartments, and I don't know, I have the opportunity to coordinate the course, and I brought some of this mindset to the other instructors, which is the sort of bloody-minded pragmatism that we can't actually shape good urban form in the city when we're working in these contexts, especially. Like in North America, we don't buy up an entire block and convert it. And so the question to me became like, how do you approach that context with a positive attitude while still recognizing that you can't control everything? Like, what can you be ambitious about? And so by saying like there's a value to heterogeneity, I think we kind of convinced ourselves that that could be an end to itself. But one thing I've learned with the instructors in this course and studying this middle scale fabric that you're asking us for is that indeed there is a need to think more critically about that. I'm not sure exactly what that yields yet, but there's something to it that I am appreciating and the kind of as this approach evolves.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have said what you didn't do, because actually it's more, I was trying to figure out whether or not we should think of the heterogeneity positively or as an intermediate stage in the reformulation of the city, because I do think that there, you kind of, like intensification, where you think of single family moving into multiplex, probably over the course of decades will be a ripple effect which will transform the entire block. So for a long time we'll be in an intermediate stage. But I mean, I have to say, I keep thinking of this discussion I had once on a jury with colleagues here, landscape architects, and I said something about missing streets that had uniform tree species. And they all, jumped down my throat and said, "Oh my God, you're so out of it. Don't you realize how vulnerable single species streets are to disease, and that now, the rubric is it's got to be heterogeneous." And in a certain way, I mean, I think you could argue that the idea of, individual agency, unpredictable transformation, and variety of units is a better reflection of diversity of social needs than more uniform, say, typological pattern making. Even though I still think that, I keep thinking of streets like Lonsdale up in Forest Hill, which has like a series of L-shaped 3-story walk-up courtyards, and they're all different. They're not uniformly designed, but they do form a certain kind of pattern and texture for the street. And that the catalogs could be oriented in that direction, or they could demonstrate the a greater, like say, a commitment to much more diverse fabric formations. That's anyway. Yes.
This being your chance to reinvent the wheel of housing thank you. This being your chance to reinvent the wheel as housing, as one of the architect's missions, shelter, along many other, civic and all those dimensions. All I'm seeing is traffic. Density, and traffic, and we're stuck with the bike lanes being added, the bike lanes being deleted, LRTs taking 15 plus years. Might have broke the system. So is this being done in a silo, like with your other stakeholders, CMHC and the greater government bodies? Is this being done in a silo, or what's the urban planning? What is the bigger vision for Canada? What are we saying here? How are we communicating with density and circulation? Thank you.
I don't. It's interesting. So what's exciting about participating with this work is that it's happening now, and I don't think we quite know what to do with it. Like, zoning has been frozen for 50 years, and all of a sudden we're changing it, and units are popping up, and we discovered that we don't have enough electrical capacity for a block. Or we, to your point, like maybe didn't do a kind of traffic engineering study for that street to make sure that there was enough capacity to handle the new density. So it's really interesting, and a lot of conversations I know Janna at LGA and SVN have been having lately, and looking at kind of mid-rise buildings, is to actually rethink how we assess the city in a more innovative way to address the scale of density. Like, we used to do secondary plans for which you would do an assessment for a big region, right? And then you would a master plan and the towers would come. But how to approach regional design or kind of district design at an incremental scale is, I think, this really interesting and evolving challenge that we're now facing.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. if I could summarize a question as incrementalism versus revolution or something like that, your project clearly comes out of a moment in time where codes have been changed in certain ways. In fact, perhaps as Michael just pointed out, some of the biggest code changes we've seen in about 50 years have been recent. On the other hand, your project also seems to almost algorithmically respond to code parameters as they are now. And I wonder how are there certain changes, let's say certain things we're arguing about right now, like the single stair or parking requirements, but there might be others. And maybe we could even add like abolishing the CMHC or things like that. Are there certain parameters you think your design, I probably shouldn't, I'm sure you have fantastic people from CMHC here right now. Are there certain parameters you think that this could actually, you could take another year and you could totally deal with them, but there might be other parameters that would almost kind of leave this as an index stuck in the moment?
You know, in part, I think there's so much attention paid to the changes in zoning and policy now that it's like a tsunami, or it feels like a tsunami. But in fact, there's a huge temporal aspect to this that I think is the tempering device. So when we talk about adding more density in neighborhoods, you know, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in 10 years. It's probably going to happen over 50 years. So there's a kind of a critical perspective that you have to take, I think, in measuring the impact of the changes to zoning and policy. And it's unfortunate that it took this long to alter the policy and the zoning, and so there's a lot to catch up on. And so it seems, I think, larger than it is. And in some ways, you know, we've done a lot of work on the single stair and other aspects of sort of medium density. And those ideas, Alaris's courtyard housing, these are not new ideas, and they're offered to spark interest. But again, are we going to get a single stair? I think we are, but it's going to take 10 years. So nothing is happening overnight. I just think there's a maelstrom of conversation now because there's such a need for change.
Hi there. I guess I'd like to ask a question about sort of this idea of heterogeneity in the context of a very sort of orthodox approach in a way to redevelopment in the suburban context that was discussed earlier, where you are respecting setbacks, front, back, otherwise side. And also, do you feel that then this kind of approach would reinforce the urban grid and all its failings, especially in the suburbs? And if so, how does one sort of move beyond that to create a better urban grid so that a denser neighborhood can actually function properly rather than in these sort of little cul-de-sacs and ins and outs that we sort of see in the suburban fabric especially? Thanks.
I think to some extent, some of the work that didn't get presented is the policy analysis. And one of the things that we think there's a missed opportunity when we're writing policy is actually to let design inform the kind of policy that produces things that we want. We often see policy actually developed in a bit of a vacuum separate from design. And so one of the things that we have tried to do with each conversation with EHON and collaborations that we have done along the way is actually challenge the assumptions that are being put forward and identify the barriers in the legislation that we think are preventing the design and development of higher quality housing, and then bring those into a conversation to hopefully shift where those came from. We actually did a study before the multiplex bylaw was passed where we made a series of recommendations, some of which were taken up and some were not. But one of the major ones was actually to reduce to eliminate FSI from the requirements for multiplex housing. And so I think there's actually inherent in all of the work a really deep analysis of policy, and then that sort of sits on the shelf for a moment, and we take an approach that leads with design, and then we actually come back and we revisit the policy to see where those incongruencies are and where there's an opportunity to push back. And I don't think we haven't been pushing radically at this point, because I don't think we live in a city that responds well to radical things, unfortunately. But similar to the kind of incremental approach, I think, is finding the pieces that there's a potential for political will to make change and being targeted in that approach.
I also think that there's a kind of fallacy in thinking that it's only just policy and zoning, that there's actually underlying issues that are, I think, harder to resolve than many zoning and policy issues. And those have to do with special interests of groups and organizations and corporations that actually have a real investment in things staying as they are. So whether it's as something as mundane but actually hugely impactful, like garbage collection, the size of a garbage truck, where do you get it, how do you collect it, that has a huge impact. Single stair. So if you kind of scratch the surface a bit, it's not people at City Hall, it's the people who have the garbage collection services. And it's the fire chiefs who have baked in bias to keep things a certain way. So I think there's a part of this that I hate to say is actually out of our control in a lot of ways. And all you can do is raise it up and advocate for change, but it takes a lot of work and a kind of real galvanizing of action to change those really deep-seated what are called like regular modes of practice. They're only regular because that's what we do now.
I have a question, though, also, which is, I mean, this issue, I mean, you also have to have public buy-in. And I remember when, the Places to Grow legislation was passed, there was a lot of anxiety on the part of the province about mandating intensification targets. And what you all are looking for is intensification. So there's also going to be, and allowing policy to change legislatively requires public buy-in, and publics often have a lot of anxiety and negative feelings about intensification. So, part of what you are doing in some of the drawings that you showed that showed outcomes are to show outcomes which presumably are tolerable, even desirable, and acceptable. I'm just wondering how much work you feel needs to go into that, having talked about these other obstacles.
I'll just mention briefly, you hear about folks that are against density, the NIMBY thing, and one of the things that we, I think, try to do is understand that that voice is one amongst many in the city, and in fact, when you start to scratch the surface, the folks that don't show up at kind of councillor meetings or public policy debates, or the folks that are kind of working their second job that can't make it out. And those are the ones that actually do have basement apartments in their house or consider doing these kinds of intensifications that maybe would make their life easier to live. And so I think there's an interest that we have in kind of providing, channeling some of the efforts of folks that don't have a chance to speak out. I don't want to say speak for, that's certainly not what we're trying to do, but recognizing that there's more to our city than those who don't think it should be intensified, and it's exciting to kind of find ways to connect with those voices.
I think the other thing that I would add, and I think one of the great potentials of the new design catalog in a way is it exposes a whole population of people who don't have exposure to, let's call it, good design, in a way to see kind of what options are actually out there that aren't currently being provided in the market. the idea that you would buy a condo that has a living room and kitchen that doesn't have a window in it, it like blows my mind. But for someone who doesn't really understand that there is a possibility for something else that's better than that, I think something that we try to do in the work is foreground like best practice design principles, even though they sometimes manifest themselves in a modest and understated way, but to start to think of like how we can have a conversation around what quality housing looks like, particularly in the renovation and multiplex space, where we see so much kind of like haphazard, crazy things where people are hacking things to make them work, and partially because they don't know how to do it, or they aren't thinking in the kind of like long-term phased approach that a designer might approach it. And so I think actually just helping people visualize what's possible is a great outcome and ambition of the work as well.
Having optimistically worked within the rules for so long, if there's a rule or two that you could break that would make housing either more accessible, cheaper, or just better designed across Canada, what would that be?
You want to take that?
Well, I would say the single stair point access would make a huge difference in making better quality housing, better units, more efficient units, and actually I think in a way the option for better communities within a multi-unit residential experience.
Hi. I just want to say this was an amazing presentation. I loved seeing about the new platform that's soon to be released. The question that comes to mind is there an ideal state of a home? So for example, the platform is to help make more accessible to like civilian developers themselves. So I think of, there are obviously homes in Toronto that have been built almost up to a century ago and they're still standing. Is there an ideal state or like of homes that this can be applied to? And are there limitations to homes that are like a lot older that maybe still have like areas like retrofit areas or like weaker aspects in them compared to homes built more recently? Does that appear as limitations in ways in which the platform can be applied? I hope my question makes sense.
I love this question. The idea that you think of a home in different states, I think is an exciting idea. So what it is today and what your needs are may be different than what it will be tomorrow. I don't know if there is one necessarily, but I think maybe one thing that we've learned a bit is the need to actually recognize that an ideal state is nebulous. It changes based on your life circumstance, and actually thinking about how to do design that enables homes to respond to the changes in your life, I think is my best effort to answer that question.
So it's 8 o'clock. I think
Yeah,
we'll call it a night. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for an amazing presentation and the body of work you put together. I just want to thank you. Once.
That was subtle.
So, I just want to remind everybody about Caraballo next week on the 20th. There's the Howarth Wright exhibition of students who've studied Wright and have work up in the gallery behind us, the Larry Wayne Richards. And I think you all can continue your chats for a little bit with our guests tonight if they're up for it. So thanks again. See you all.